I would like to welcome everyone who's here today and those who will arrive after we start. My name is Mike Bernhardt. I am the editor of Voices of the Grieving Heart, about which we are here to celebrate. But really, we're celebrating the people who are going to be reading their poems because they're the ones who make this book. For those who don't know, although probably most of you do, Voices of the Grieving Heart is a collection of over 160 poems, essays, and images from 83 contributors who lost someone that they loved. And the causes of those losses are as varied as the people who are here. But the fact is that people died, and it's that sort of a loss is something that changes people's lives. And that's kind of what's reflected in the poems that we have. So the way this is going to work is I'm going to introduce John Fox shortly, and then John will introduce Chris Kington Barker. And then John will introduce the first three readers. We're going to have 6 readers today. John will introduce the first 3 of them. After they're done reading, then we'll have a little kind of comments, questions and answers period. And then after that, we'll have 3 more readers, and then we'll repeat. So what I would encourage you to do is, if you have questions or comments while people are reading, just put them in the chat, and we can kind of keep track of that during that. I don't want to call it a break because we're not telling people to get up. But during that period, you know, we can answer any questions that came up, and if you have any new questions, then we can. Then Nanlia can read them if they're in the chat, or if you'd like to ask it aloud, then just let us know that and she'll unmute you. So this will go until 5:30. It's going to be a very fast 85 minutes. And again, I thank you all for coming. So John Fox is the founder of the Institute for Poetic Medicine, which was founded in 2005. And the mission of the Institute for Poetic Medicine is to awake soulfulness in the human voice. John is also the author of 2 books. He wrote Poetic Medicine, The Healing Art of Poem Making. That was his second book. His first book was called Finding What You Didn't Lose, Expressing Your Creativity and Truth Through Poem Making. He was also featured on the PBS documentary, Healing Words, Poetry and Medicine. So thank you for being here, John.
Mike, thank you. And I just, you know, sort of those facts of my life are good, but like it's the relationships that arise from those that are important. So about 28 years ago, Mike Bernhardt called me. I think that's, or we met at a workshop, a class I was giving on poetry therapy at John F. Kennedy. And we made a connection then. He had made the decision to bring poems together for Voices of the Grieving Heart. And so we talked about that. And then it was again published, its first edition about 1994. And then I didn't hear from Mike. And I did wonder about him. And that book was on my shelf, and I would refer to it in my work frequently. And then about 2 years ago, he called me, and we picked up our friendship where it was back 27, 28 years ago. And we had a couple of meetings before. This was pre-COVID-19, and you know, lunch meetings, and Mike talked about, he had thoughts about republishing Voices of the Grieving Heart in a second edition. And one of the things he said was, you know, I said, well, you'll have to have a section on the pandemic. And he said, well, I put the call out and I didn't get many poems back. And I said, well, let's try again. And so through the Institute, we did, and he got a significant sort of wave of poems coming in at that time. And so it's, Mike, it's just been, you know, wonderful to pick up that friendship again. And again, you know, if I turn the tapestry of those facts around, there's so often all kinds of relationships and friendships that have, you know, have been part of that. So I want to welcome everybody, and especially I want to welcome and wish good day to our poets who are reading today. And you may have attended many poetry readings, or maybe this is your first, I don't know. In just about any context, hearing poetry enriches us. Yet with the speaking of these poems, I recognize there is vulnerability, even fragility, joining with sacred space. So my appreciation to Mike, in her testimonial for this book, Palestinian American poet Naomi Shihab Nye writes, Voices of the Grieving Heart, carefully curated by Mike Bernhardt, is a profoundly compassionate friend of a book. I'll say that again. Voice of the Grieving Heart, carefully curated by Mike Bernhardt, is a profoundly compassionate friend of a book. Careful, compassionate, friend. Hear, hear, I say to you, Mike. These poems of grieving are a kind of outflow stemming from the experience of death, of loss. They make their impact on the poet first, writing them, and then perhaps you here now, listening. I hope you make plenty of room and allow their impact to be felt. So here's a story which I feel relates, but I imagine this as a story of a poem's powerful inflow. Today, we're going to be hearing our poems, so there's an outflow of them happening. But this is a story about which I'm calling inflow. Early in my career with work with poetry, I worked closely with children. And through the California Poets in the Schools, my mentor was an elder woman, Lou Melander. Lou, who possessed many childlike qualities, showed me so much through her wisdom. I think this is about 1991 or 92. Not too long after we met, Lou was diagnosed with an aggressive breast cancer, and she chose not to pursue any aggressive remedies. She did ask me if I would come over to her home and read out loud meditations by Stephen Levine from his book, Who Dies, or Meetings at the Edge. Meditations about making room for pain, about dying, about being in the moment. I did this with Lou with honor and care, with friendship. It wasn't long after that I found myself sitting in a hospice room with Lou. This time she didn't say anything to me. In fact, that night she was actively dying. Her face, to be honest, was a death mask. Skin tightly drawn, eyes bulging. Still, I sat beside her, slowly reading poems by Jalaluddin Rumi. I wasn't in a hurry. There was peace in the room. Then I read Lou a fifth poem. At the conclusion of this particular poem, something happened. Something happened inside me. Something happened in the atmosphere of the space around us. It was as if a stone were dropped into a lake, as if a stone were dropped into a lake, and there was not a single ripple, nothing. It was there, it disappeared. At this moment, Lou, looking as I described, lifted her slight shoulders, turned her riven face toward my face, and said, "Read that poem again." Wait, she didn't just say it. This was a fierce command. And I did. Soon after this, her friend Joyce Savory arrived. Joyce and I joined our hands over Lou and said a prayer. I expressed my love and left. Lou died later in that early morning. I have a deep sense that this poem journeyed with her. She took it. So I just bow this moment to Lou Melander for letting me know that that poem, like it did to me, like it did to the room we were in, like it did inside her, that she needed to hear it again. So right now I'm pleased to introduce you to Chris Kington Barker. Chris, are you there? You know, I've got this gallery thing, but I don't see you.
Yes, I'm here.
Wait, wave your hand. There you are.
Yeah.
So Chris is currently an instructor with INELDA. And INELDA stands for the International End-of-Life Doula Association. Before that, and this is how and when we met, for 10 years, Chris was the executive director of the San Luis Obispo Hospice. At the recommendation of a wonderful volunteer at the hospice, a mutual friend, Jeannie Greensfelder, Chris invited me to bring poetic medicine to her volunteers at SLO Hospice. I had the good fortune to do this twice. So Chris's deep appreciation of poetry's healing power, and I would say her recognition of the capacity of a poem to generate love, helped to make a lasting friendship between us. And it's really what brings her to you today. So I'm going to turn my Zoom face towards Chris and say hello.
Hello. Thank you all. This is my second time joining this group and joining Mike and John for this poetry reading. And I'm just over the moon about being able to be present here. What, you know, the story that John told about Lou is something that I've witnessed so many times. And I don't write music. I don't sing very well. I also don't write poetry, but like my appreciation of people who do sing and wonderful music and wonderful poetry, what I have really learned in my work is to appreciate how, especially when there is little time, and especially when people have a hard time forming words, how important words are and how they can be channeled so easily through the hearts of others. Poetry, like the poetry in this book, is incredibly a gift. And as someone who's worked with the dying for decades, and as someone who works with the grieving and has been among the grieving many times in my life, the ability to tap into the words of someone else and have a Lou experience, to be able to have that touch me in a way to say, ah, yes, that is it, is sometimes the most wonderful feeling one can ever get. To be able to have anyone at any age be able to just touch that is a gift that is without words, even if they came through poetry. And I thank all of you for your work, your words, and I look forward to hearing them from your lips tonight. Thank you.
Thanks, Chris.
Mm.
So we'll begin our reading, and I wish we had time for people to read twice. Anyone who's been in a workshop with me knows that I really invite people to take their time and to read twice. But here in this poetry reading, we'll read once, and I'm gonna just reiterate that if you hear a line in someone's poem that touches your heart, touches in the gut, touches your, you can put that in the chat. So our first reader is going to be Nori Rost. And as I said, I'm going to read I'm opening my book up. So Nori J. Rost considered herself a grief expert. And she put that in quotes, grief expert, until her brother Eric took his own life in 2013 at the age of 55. She discovered that surviving his suicide was far more dense, dark, and despairing than any other grief she had experienced. Prior to that, Nori lost her dad to cancer and a nephew to SID, sudden infant death syndrome. During the AIDS epidemic, she lost 33 friends and officiated at scores of memorial services. Poetry has been a vital part of her healing process. Nori has been a Unitarian Universalist minister for 32 years. Nori.
Thank you, John. I have a few poems from the book that I will share. This first one is autobiographical, and it's when you suffer a significant loss, regardless of the cause, it seems as if people always ask you, well, how are you doing? And what response do you give to that, right? It's like, fine, right? But this poem is an attempt to actually answer that question through poetry. It's called After the Service. After the service, where I stood and nervously eulogized my brother, my voice not breaking once, not even once, while my mom and sisters wept so helplessly. A man comes to shake my hand, to tell me what a terrific job I had done. He says to me, I hope you take the time to grieve yourself. I look at him dazedly. It is impossible to describe this grief to anyone. I could say I was in mourning, that I was grieving my loss, but what sentence would hold the description of the form grief takes now? The gasping, hyperventilating sense of it, the bending over at the waist while simultaneously beating my breast with closed fist, the howling, ah, that is so fierce and loud, even with my head buried in a pillow, that I am somewhat surprised the neighbors haven't called the police. Or the way my heart hurts with such an angry, desperate pounding cadence that I want to reach into my chest cavity and rip it out. I smile blankly at the man, a stranger, and assure him I do. The second poem that I want to read is about my own writing poetry. Poetry is very healing to me. And during the US AIDS years, I wrote an unpublished book of poetry called On the Outside Looking In, a lesbian's perspective on AIDS. Writing poetry was almost an instantaneous response to my brother's suicide. And this poem, I Have Begun Writing, reflects that. I have begun writing, words springing up from the newly tilled and sown field of this bitter earth, an explosion of dark blossoms. I try to pick a few, lush with barely ripened grief, to press between the brittle pages of this new reality, to preserve forever their terrible beauty. But now I have to leave. I have an appointment and I'm going to be late as it is. Frantically, I grab a pencil and an old envelope. I want to write down these ideas before I leave, as if I couldn't remember them, as if they weren't forever a part of the landscape of my soul. I want to be sure that these thoughts aren't lost to the busyness of life goes on. So I jot them down: the family, the phone call, the shot to the heart. As I say, poetry is very healing for me, not just writing it, but reading it. And this is a poem I wrote it's a part of my healing journey. This poem is about one of my favorite poets, Mary Oliver, and refers to a line from the end of her poem, Wild Geese. I used to wonder what it would be like to be shadowed by Mary Oliver. She would quietly follow me around every day and then write a poem about my life, about the minutes that just passed and the beauty that I missed and the chaos I chose to see instead. But now I wish she could plunge her curious hands into the inky darkness of my grief, swirling her fingers round and round until she captured the essence of it all, and then, withdrawing her hands, dripping with my pain, paint words like shadow puppets on the wall, so moving and delicate and strong, and heartbreakingly true, that the unquantifiable anguish would almost make sense, and the searing, blistering, hot iron pain would almost be beautiful. And I would almost be glad to have experienced that deep darkness. Yet even Mary Oliver can take me only to almost. And that's not quite far enough to make this bearable, no matter how good I try to be, or how many miles of desert I cross. And then I have one more real quickly. This is, spiritual leader Abraham Hicks says that when someone commits suicide, it's a way to reboot their life because they've gotten so far off track from their purpose that they had come into this life with, so that they reboot so that they can come back and start over anew. So this poem addresses that possibility for my brother and refers to the Greek myth about how Theseus used a spool of thread to be able to find his way out of the maze after slaying the Minotaur. Everyone else had perished in the maze, unable to find their way out. So this is called Things I Want to Ask You in the Maze of the Minotaur. Because who knows what happens when we die? I have always prided myself on my unknowing. I claim that we are made of energy which never dies, but just goes on spiraling out into the vast universe, as far away as the most distant star you are, and perhaps as close as the breath I just took in. And when I think of that, and imagine you here with me, swirling around in dust motes of regret, I want to ask you, was it worth it? Are you satisfied with the outcome? Are you at peace? This is the only question where I believe I know the answer. And for that anyway, I am grateful. These are the questions that haunt me in the darkest hours of night when I awake and cannot sleep again. So I lie in bed as tears stream down my face, and I ask you these simple things. Are you happy? Can you see the bigger picture now? How much love this world held for you? How much your presence meant? Do you see from your broader perspective that there were resources you could have used, that there was a way out of the Minotaur's labyrinth after all, string to hold you fast to the light? Do you see all these things now? And will you promise me with all your shattered heart, that the next time you visit this world, in whatever form you take, that you will remember the thread, the sword to kill the monsters in your soul, and return safely again to the arms of those who love you? Thank you.
Nori, if you'd have anything more to say, you're welcome. Or is someone keeping time? Mike, how we doing?
I had 33 seconds left, but I'll yield to the floor. Thank you for listening.
Thank you for speaking. I'm
Thank
gonna
you very much, Nori.
turn to Ken. And my little paper towel thing with KS is here. Ken, say your last name for me.
Slezeric, like Slez, and then if you have a friend named Eric, Slezeric.
Slezeric. Well, Ken Slezeric found his 24-year-old son, Kenny, at home, dead from an accidental drug overdose in 2019. His grief was so profound that it almost drove him to suicide, which was prevented only when he clearly heard Kenny's voice say, "Please don't hurt yourself." Ken is a special education teacher who has also provided professional development for teachers, spoken at conferences, and written poetry curricula. Ken says his mission now is to empower those who grieve through the healing power of poetry. Welcome, Ken.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here. My son died exactly a year and a half ago today, as a matter of fact. And I'll just share something that literally just happened about an hour ago. So before logging on and joining the Zoom session, I went for a drive to get a coffee. And my son, a big part of his life was basketball. He wasn't the best player, but he loved the game. And one of the last things he bought was a pair of the newest shoes. And I'm talking to him, as I often do, and I'm just, trying to get my head in a good space for this. And I'm driving home, and literally a basketball rolls, nobody's by it, a basketball rolls in front of me, goes to the other side. So now I'm tearing up and I pass it by, and then I say, I got to go get that ball. And I turn around, and by the time I got there, some lady got it. But I mean, I don't know what I'm supposed to do with that, but it's kind of appropriate. And I'm going to do 3 poems today, 2 from the book and an additional appropriate one. The first one was very, very difficult to write. And in the end, it was very therapeutic. Talk about poetic medicine. And it just helped me process the loss. It's the moment I found him. And I think people oftentimes say there's 2 moments to their life. And I know it's true of me. Before my son died, when everything was basically right with the world, and then after, where there's a lot of adjustments. And I went back and forth with Mike a few times on this one, and he pushed me a little more, and ultimately it helped me process things, and it was healing to me. It's called Etched in My Brain. Face down on the bed, my son, arms outstretched and legs grown cold. One tainted pill did you in at 24 years old. I quickly turned you over and looked deep into your eyes. He's gone, I screamed, he's gone, with anguished high-pitched cries. I peered into your open mouth with vomit on its side, and horror overtook me then as part of me had died. I ran around the kitchen like wounded, helpless prey. I cursed out loud and whimpered some when they took you away. I carry this etched in my brain in guilt since last I checked. A father's job is to love, but mostly to protect. And yeah, the protection part is another thing that I've dealt with, and I'm going through a lot of healing myself. That memory was a source of PTSD, a lot of health issues, but I'm doing much better now. The second poem I'd like to read from the book is called Facing Fears. Personally, I reached a point where I looked at it as I had three choices. I could literally die, become a recluse, or put one foot in front of the other and figure it out and do something, anything. And that's kind of what I did. It's all a part of like fighting back, I guess. And it's called Facing Fears. I fear somehow I might forget your lovely eyes and face, and yet I know that this will never be, but nonetheless, it bothers me. I fear to smile if good days come, but glad I'm here, no longer numb. Afraid that joy could maybe mean I'm past it now, not in between. I fear the days of tears and pain and hurting that will come again, to strike me hard with waves of grief, to test my strength and my belief. I fear the loss of memories, and now it brings me to my knees. I fear these things, but I'll survive. My love for you keeps me alive. And yeah, those things of the fear, I know I'm never going to forget him, but you know, I think as we age, you know, memories get a little duller, and I'm sorry, get a little emotional here. And that's a fear, and it's a thing I'm, you know, working through. But I also am finding meaning and purpose in the loss, and you know, trying to make some sense out of it and possibly do some good. For the last poem, it's sort of somewhat of a thank you. I often tell people, so since then so I'm in the process of becoming a certified grief companion, and I co-facilitate a men's grief group. And I've also written a children's grief poetry book that'll be coming out. And I try to get meaning through that. And in my association with that, sometimes in the men's group, you know, it comes up where I tell people to look for the heroes in your loss. And you know, because they're there, you know, there's those people, those little angels, you might want to call them, or just people that have helped you. And for me, there have been many. And then also, you know, I've even asked myself, is there anything good or positive that I can take out of this? And for myself, you know, my capacity to love and a greater empathy have definitely been changed me for the better in this. Of course, I would do anything if I could have my son back. And I always realize as I talk to people that that person that was lost is somebody's someone. And I try to keep that in mind. So this is sort of a thank you. And it's called Ask and I'll Be There. This grief belongs to me, you see, it's mine and mine alone. It's something from that tragic night that I can call my own. If someone told me they could take it all away, I'd say, it binds me to a son I love, and so I say, no way. But when the burden overwhelms, I welcome some relief, and thank you for your loving hearts that help to ease the grief. It gets me through the trying times when I have had enough. It brings a sweetness to my day that otherwise was rough. It lets me know I'm not alone and people really care. If you should ever need my help, ask and I'll be there. Thank you.
Mm. Ken, thank you. And I hope people are sort of making note in their hearts or about, comments they'd like to share after we, have our third poet in this first section read. I'm going to say, Ken, the strength of your rhymes in this poem, in these poems, to me, bring a fierceness, to them and to your voice that is very compelling.
Thank you very much. My voice was quivering a little, but I appreciate, I'm glad to be here. Thank you.
I think the voice I mean is the voice of like
The
being true to yourself.
I hear you. Thank you.
It's so interesting. These poems are, about the worst things, and I don't know how you feel about it, but they deserve time. And so I hope you feel that you've had time to hear them. So I'm going to turn my attention to Paco Michelle Atwood. And Paco Michelle lost her father to COVID-19 while she was quarantined and recovering herself. She promised herself that she would honor both that experience and her father as soon as she was able to write about them. Paco Michelle is a poet and mixed reality content producer with a professional background in technical quality and creative development. She focuses on supporting the arts, alternative healing, and self-empowerment. She focuses on supporting the arts, alternative healing, and self-empowerment.
Unmute. Okay. Thank you so much, John. I am strangely nervous right now, but very, very honored to be included in this book and included in this tribe and this experience with all of you. Thank you, Mike and John and everyone. I'm going to just get straight to the reading. I have a tendency to digress and talk a lot in preparation of the poem. So I'm going to read one piece, the one piece that I have in the book. And I'm also going to read a piece that's not in the book that I wrote prior to, but I was really hell-bent on writing new work, so I wanted to make sure I submitted something that was fresh and something that was true, not just something that was fits the bill, to be in the book. I wanted this to be pure. So this piece that I'm reading is called 21st Century Fruit, and it subtly touches on the darkness and of seeing the darkness and the death that Billie Holiday alluded to in her song "Strange Fruit." But at the same time, there's the undercurrent of the reality of the flip side of what pulls the good stuff that happened as a result of us reacting to and responding to COVID-19. Anyhow, I'll get into it. This piece comes from a place of reality. Usually I write from a very spiritual standpoint or etheric, or I just dive into just a real moment, and this is one of those. 21st Century Fruit. So I'm going to start my timer. It was strange and sorrowfully sweet, having to navigate my daddy's dying. There was no crying, not right away anyway. Only a crash course in relationship building with Dr. Zoom and Nurse Skype in ICU. 7 days in limbo, my daddy floated, tagged, COVID PUI upon arrival. No visitors in, no patients out, they said. Dying alone, his biggest fear, and yet our only chance for survival. It was strange and sorrowfully sweet, bringing family together while in quarantined recovery myself. Only 2 relatives allowed, they said, and only when death is imminent. Of course, I made them tell me exactly what that meant. It was not a stroke of genius, nor a bout of temporary insanity, but rather an executive decision made by a night shift guard who opted for compassion instead of isolation for humanity. Even then, never giving in to the notion of a solitary passing, technology was the portal, the power of love the key to guide both our bravest and our bedridden through the scariest parts, to shift focus on our ability to transcend circumstance at will, regardless of health conditions, no matter how far. Stretching time like saltwater taffy with a lurking bite. Strange and sorrowfully sweet is this unfamiliar fruit. But it did bring a peaceful passing to the season, along with a most compelling urge to reboot. So I feel inclined to explain that, like, if we were reading twice, that stroke of genius or bout of temporary sanity but rather a night shift, an executive decision made by a night shift guard who opted for compassion and instead of isolation, basically alludes to the moment when they weren't going to let anyone come in to see anybody unless they were dying, and even then they weren't going to let family in under some real special circumstance. And if it wasn't for the fact that some security guard who answered the phone and said, if you can get here before 7, come see, somebody can come here and be with your dad. And so there's also this kind of positive aspect, the flip side of the coin to the 2020 and the impact that the pandemic had on us. And so a lot of people had a chance to kind of be still and reassess things and reassess their priorities and so forth. So there was a positive thing that came out of the loss. And there was an opportunity, rather, to find a canvas, a blank canvas for new beginning, even in the course of healing. And so I wanted to tap into that with this piece. The next piece that I wanted to read is kind of special to me because dealing with loss, we sometimes quite frequently find ourselves alone, feeling alone. And I personally am a firm believer in the afterlife and also being connected with the spiritual realm. And having lost my mother, both my parents, without being there present during their death, and not being able to attend my mother's funeral, I found a lot of consolation. We sit and, we have relationship, we have conversations with our lost ones, with our loved ones who have departed or passed over. And so I wrote this piece called I Saw You, The Haunting, from the voice of the person on the other side seeing us grieving. And it kind of brings a bit of consolation or a bit of comfort to myself, really, and to anyone who actually can recognize or relate to the moment. I saw you, the haunting. I saw you last night, waiting for me. I felt the ground pressing heavy against my feet, and I couldn't fly. When I screamed, you didn't hear me. When I whispered, you wept inside. So I stood still and silent, beneath the branches that brushed your collar. That's when you heard me. You were about to curse the lazy gardener, but a cool breeze came by, swept me straight over to you. The faint aroma of French lavender struck your face like a bag of feathers, then fluttered away as quickly as it came. You remembered, you smiled, and for a very brief moment, your brow was rested. Yes, I saw you. Thank you. Again, that came from the voice of the angel life that I believe is still with us. I appreciate you listening.
Paco Michelle, isn't there something precious about the quiet that you can feel around all of us, even here in these little Zoom boxes? You know, that there's a quiet or a sort of that meets your poem. And I'm just wondering how that feels for you. If it does,
feels,
if it does.
No, it does. It does. It feels like the space that feels like that space that I am in, or that we find ourselves in when we are having a personal moment, when we are reflecting, or when we, you know, on the memory of a person that we love, or a moment, or we smell that fragrance that they smelled like, you know, those small tiny elements that really stick with us, or that can catch us off guard out of the blue and just stop us in our tracks, just stop our world, and really just, and of course you can't stop thinking and stressing about, you know, the busyness of everyday life and all that, but that's one of the reasons why your mantra, you know, to awake the soulfulness of the human voice, poetry is that driver, that thing, that place for that to happen. Oh, that's my time.
No. We're overlapping here. We're sort of going.
Okay.
Everything is good.
Yeah. No, but no, the quietness, that stillness, that is actually what I was trying to capture, especially in that point when, you know, when you heard me mention how, well, when I screamed, you know, you didn't hear me. So I whispered, and all it did was make you cry and weep inside. And so I just, okay, so I'll just be still and I'll be quiet. And this is what I feel like an angel or someone, a celestial being, you know, or just, you know, a loved one on the other side might be thinking about or having to deal with. It's like, God, you know, I couldn't move. The earth pressed heavy against my feet and I couldn't fly. Well, that was me imagining an angel, you know, seeing their loved one and not being able to do anything but be there, especially if you can't even hear them. But it was important to convey that message and to receive the message in that moment, in that silence, in that stillness. Yes, she's there. She sees me. He's there. He's here. He's okay. And you will be too. But you won't find it until you are still and quiet and silent. And sometimes it's very hard to find those quiet places. So hopefully that's what that piece did. And to address your question, it felt like that quietness. And I resisted the urge to fill the silence.
Wow. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. I know that people have been putting messages into chat, and then Leah's been sort of probably tracking them. And then I want to invite Chris.
Yeah. We're gonna take a few minutes for some questions for the various authors and readers. And if you can raise your hand, your virtual hand, then we can go ahead and Leah can either unmute you or you can unmute yourselves. And You can raise your virtual hand by going to participants, clicking on the participants. And actually, a lot of you will have reactions. And in your reactions, if you click the reactions button, you should see it where it says raise hand. Or if you can't find it, just raise your hand. We can find you.
There you go.
Like John's hand is up.
Yeah.
So I would be able to call on John. So John, do you have a question?
No, I was just doing that as an
Oh.
example.
So if you have a question or a comment for the, oh, Jazz, yes. Can you unmute yourself? There you
Yeah.
go.
I want to thank Paco Michelle for opening for me a possibility. I will now go and write from my son to me and see what comes. I've been writing one-way conversations, and thank you. I will fix that now and let him speak too. Thank you.
Thank you. Sorry.
It's so interesting, you know, I, like you just said, I'm sorry. And you know, did anybody here in this room or want Paco Michelle to say, I'm sorry, you know? And I get it, I understand it. But I'm just have this feeling that, you know, we're quick to sort of hold ourselves back when we don't have to.
I see that Mike Bernhardt has his hand up.
Yeah.
I do. Yeah, what I wanted just to say was, you know, when we first started this, I was kind of on automatic. I had been out all day and came in here and changed my shirt and all of this stuff. And so as soon as John started speaking, after I introduced him, I just like had the experience that Paco Michelle was just kind of talking about, not with my first wife, but just sort of dropping into quiet and being able to feel and experience what's going on here. And so, yeah, I just want to thank you all for, you know, those of you who've read and just the space that's here is just wonderful. This is not an ordinary Zoom meeting. So that's all I wanted to say.
Is it really 5 o'clock?
Oh, wow.
Mike?
Yes, yes, it is.
Yeah, it's technically it's 2 minutes to 5.
So 8, 8, and 8 is what's 8 times 8 plus times 3.
24.
Right. So we'll probably run over, but
Yeah.
I'm fine with staying here all night. Maybe not all night.
So why it feels like just another, I mean, Chris, could you say something more or?
You know, one of the things that I was really I'm touched by all of them, but I wanted to say to Kim that, you know, your situation, my daughter found my 14-year-old granddaughter had died of an overdose on New Year's Eve 3 years ago. And she had a circumstance where she found her after death. And so your words, your heart, your breaking touched me very deeply. Yeah.
Could I say something really quickly?
Of course.
I wanted to acknowledge with Ken, I really, really love what you said when you said, look for the heroes in your loss. That is really, really rich because it taps into our capacity to see something, to see some goodness in the experience and to look for the light in the darkness that we find ourselves in, because it is there, but we have to look for it. And there are heroes, there are people in our lives who are there, but we might not necessarily see them if we're just so engulfed in our own everything, our ownness, you know, and so take the time to look for the heroes in your life, look for the light, you know, those light bringers in your dark times. That really resonated with me. And for Nori, I just really love the explosion of dark blossoms and the things that you wanted to ask in the maze of the Minotaur. That brings a vision of being stuck in a maze and lost and just constantly going, but at the same time, you know, not being lost, just sticking to it and finding your path. So I wanted to just acknowledge those lines, and especially. Thank you.
I just
you for
briefly,
sharing.
I want to invite some of our listeners, some of the people who are here for the first time, or because I want to welcome you for being part of this, but obviously, you know, I hope something in these poems is reaching you. So someone, we can see some of you. Anybody have a?
I think there was somebody in the chat that had mentioned, you know, and thank you for your heart in mentioning that you were going to have a memorial for coming up, and that you were thinking about sharing the book with, or even doing some reading from this. And I'm so sorry for your circumstances. But the fact that you would consider that and think about the healing and the touch that you can give for people to be able to connect when they're just not able to even catch their breath around person. What a kind thing to think of, and what a wonderful boat to hang on to while you're drifting. So, you know, and I think that that's what this is, and that's what the combination of all of this is in this book. It's a beautiful gift for so many and from so many of you.
I've been looking for a way to,
Fereshte,
Yes,
did you
I-
want to?
yeah, I just wanted to say something, but after the lady, I think she was going to say something. Paula, I just wanted to see if I could share my poem. It's just one page, one poem today.
If it's one page, that's a fairly long poem. And I don't want to say no, but I think it'd be, I want to, you know, lean towards the readers who are reading. So,
Okay,
you know,
if there is time, if not,
Maybe after, if we stay, for those people who want to
Yes.
stay, would that be
Okay.
okay?
Fereshte,
Thank you,
I mean,
Fereshte.
yeah.
okay, no problem.
I think Paula was going to say something
I'm sorry,
in
Paula.
response to Chris.
oh, no problem. I just wanted to thank you again, Mike, for this, and all of your writers, just for this amazing book. And as I say, I was trying to think of a way to bring it to this memorial for a very sudden and unexpected, not that it's ever expected, suicide in our family. And so in a way, the timing aligns, and I'm hoping that maybe I will be able to read. I think as much as anything, it will help me shape the experience and bring something positive to it. So thank you again.
Yeah, thank you, Paula. And I think probably, John, we need to move forward with the rest of the readers.
Yes. Thank you, Chris. And thank you for your spoken thoughts and for the silent ones, for your listening. I'm going to turn back to Mike. He's going to introduce our next three readers.
Okay. So let's make sure that everyone is muted. Looks like most people are. So our first reader is Dorothy. Even though I speak some basic French, I'm probably going to mutilate your name, but it's Dorothy Lemoult. How does one say your name?
Lemoult.
Lemoult. Well, it's how it looks.
You
then.
just pronounce all the letters, which is unusual for French. So.
Exactly. I was trying to figure out what was silent. So, okay. So Dorothy Lemoult wrote her poem after the suicide of a very close friend a few years ago, but she has revisited it many times during COVID isolation. She is a French-American multidisciplinary artist and psychotherapist. She embraces the arts, community, and nonviolent communication practices as ways to promote resilience, health, and social justice. Dorothy studied poetry with John Fox at the Institute for Poetic Medicine for 3 years, but her greatest life teacher is her son, Elliot, currently 8 years old. Welcome, Dorothy.
Thank you so much, Mike. Everyone who is here, it's a very moving event. And this book is constantly with me and close to me. And right before the reading, I noticed I left it in the other room, which is so interesting because it's always near me. And I don't really enjoy having the focus on me. And what helps me with being able to share my poetry is when there's a purpose, and the community one especially. So this feels really special. Yeah, so I'll just read the poem for Tammy. I know we're short on time too, so I will just let my work speak for itself. It's called Source. When all becomes quiet and still, I find myself looking for the person I used to be. When endings become beginnings and the hours seem to have dissolved into nothing, I find myself wondering, where have I been? When the stars take over or a sliver of moon crescents the darkened sky, eyes adjusting to the newfound light, I find myself staring into the obscurity of the past. When everything around me screams to awake, awake, awake and sing, I find myself persisting that I am lost and can never be found. When all that seemed to matter is gone and sand castles are rebuilt out of air, when the eagle lands without grace, when the dragonfly silently drowns, when the whale shores up too tired to swim and spouts a final tornado, I momentarily know finding myself was never the point at all.
I think I can do this. Dorothy, could you read those last 4 or 5 lines?
I know which ones you're talking about.
I haven't asked this for others, but I would love to hear those last.
When the eagle lands, is that?
Go ahead.
Mm-hmm. When the eagle lands without grace, when the dragonfly silently drowns, when the whale shores up too tired to swim and spouts a final tornado, I momentarily know finding myself was never the point at all. So let's see. So I want, I've had a bunch of losses in my life. Well, I look back through my poems, and one of the things that feels pretty salient to me right now is this need for collective grief, which you're offering in this, in this Zoom call. And I think there's such a lack of this, especially for those of us who identify as white. We are not good at grief in our culture. And you get 3 weeks off, per the DSM, for grief, and then you have to come back, right? You qualify for a diagnosis of grief for 3 weeks, and that just is so absurd to me. But I think it represents just how we quantify everything, and there's such a need for collective spaces for grief. And for me, my spirituality, it has to do with art, and it has to do with nature. I struggle with actually believing in anything larger than that. So it's been really hard for me to accept death, and I've been really terrified of death for a very long time. But it feels like through art and through nature, I have been able to somehow bear it. So yeah, just to share that, and to maybe give some perspective to people who struggle with larger finding spirituality around death. That's definitely a struggle for me. Okay, so I wrote this one in New York. My first time I went to New York, and I had never seen the Twin Towers, and I went to the site, and then I came back to my hotel and wrote this poem. It's called Absence. When I arrived, the first thing I noticed was the absence in the sky. Though I have never been here where they stood, the towers are still missing in the mythology of my memory of what it would have been like to be here when they were still upright. The city stands at an angle, yearning for the sea. In the middle of it, you can feel the Empire State Building trying to set things straight. When I arrived, bags and bags of trash were lined up on the sidewalks like little gifts without ribbons. If you notice them, you can feel the presence and necessity of human beings. Coming here is rarely accidental. You have to want to be here. You cannot pretend to take up space in New York. No one will ever notice you. You can, however, disappear at will, and no one will notice your absence. Thank you. So, thank you. I think I will leave you here, and perhaps there will be room for other people to read. I would love to yield the rest of my time for more poems.
Thank you very much, Dorothy.
Thank you so much, Mike and John, everyone who's read so far too.
So our next reader is Carlin Page Holden. Carlin was a contributor to the first edition of this book. And although my memory is terrible for things, these sorts of things, she assures me that we met at the Center for Attitudinal Healing. We were both going to a grief support group there in Sausalito, California. And apparently that's how she heard about this project the first time around. And I believe her. So Carlin has lived in San Francisco for much of her life. She had already experienced a number of losses when she wrote about the death of her friend and soulmate, Randy, who died from AIDS in 1990. Carlin has volunteered for decades with the National AIDS Memorial and currently serves on its board of directors. Thank you for being here, Carlin.
Thank you for having me. So I wrote out what I wanted to say in between to introduce the poems that I wrote. Behind me, you see the meadow in the National AIDS Memorial in Golden Gate Park. Yesterday, I was there for a ceremony marking the 40th anniversary of the first cases of AIDS that were diagnosed 40 years ago. I have been involved in the grassroots response to that pandemic for the past 35 years. I enrolled in training for emotional support volunteers in 1986 with the Shanti Project, which was one of the early grassroots AIDS service organizations in San Francisco. As we've seen with COVID, people were stigmatized and the powers that be moved slowly to recognize and address a public health crisis. So people organized themselves to help others. At Shanti, I became friends with a talented young Texan with a megawatt smile named Randy Harvey. There were lots of beautiful cakes, gowns, flowers, songs, and laughter in between doctor's appointments, treatments, medications, and bad days. Multiple losses caught up with me when he died, and I found myself in a grief support group for a full year and playing with words to express my experiences and feelings. I liked editing my initial lines to pare down to their essence. Double Takes was one of the first and most edited of these efforts. It happens now and then, some detail known and loved captures my passing glance and rolls away the stone. But on the second look, it's just your hair, walk, stance in some other's body, and memory returns. I know I won't see you, yet I scan crowds, hoping, yearning to feel again for even a moment that sudden quickening of my everyday heart, that special joy I felt always beholding you. I was surprised that Randy didn't show up in my dreams for quite some time after his death. And one night, there he was. Reunion describes that dream. Strolling in the river, I meet you, catching the eager rush of my affection at arm's length. You hold my eyes long with yours before embracing. I feel your thinness, the lesions on your back, places where they'd never really been. We walk together arm in arm as so many times before and head uphill toward the lodge until I say I ought to find the car. You think it can wait, but I nonetheless walk off to search. Only then it comes to me, how could I have left you? And turning, I see all has changed. The path is empty and I'm alone with only the memory of you in my arms. I know the river has nourished 3 seasons since you last walked into my arms, and I can feel how precious it has been to hold you once again. I don't think of myself as a poet, but I was glad when these 2 were accepted for the original voices. When Mike reached out with the idea for this volume, I said yes again. I hadn't written anything except doggerel for years, but had long had a feeling that might turn into something suitable. It was to honor Randy on what would have been his 40th birthday that I went to the 2-year-old AIDS Memorial Grove for the first time in 1993. I became a regular at the volunteer work days that turned a neglected section of Golden Gate Park into a garden for healing and remembrance. The poem, Light in the Grove, takes its name from the annual gala of the National AIDS Memorial held annually in the artistically lighted grove. My feeling about being there each year is described by Welsh poet Henry Vaughan in the mid-1600s, the days of the English Civil War. His poem opens with the line, "They are all gone into the world of light." They are all gone into the world of light. Written in another land and time of lives caught short, centuries before we claimed these acres. And yet, entering on World AIDS Day Eve, the glowing grove, their world of light, a cloud of fireflies greets me. Spirits hosting this magic. Guests place candles on names in stone, resolving again, their story will live on. That's it. That's it.
That's a lot. I'm always amazed that, and this is my experience too, how, I mean, it's been decades for you. And I mean, and it's still, we still feel them when we read them. I feel it when I read other people's poems. I cried every day when I was putting the second volume together, just, it was quite something. And so our last reader for today, most probably, is Sam Ambler. Sam is another original contributor. And, you know, the other thing I'll just say is, I mean, Sam and I met once very briefly, and I met Carlin at this one meeting 30 years ago. But still, really, everyone who's contributed to this book, I feel like I feel a special connection that just, I don't know how to describe it, but it's just like my family. I may never meet any of you in person, but I still feel that way. So Sam's best friend of 17 years, Robert, died of AIDS in 1992, and he lost many other friends as well. His poems were published in a number of journals, and he was also a winner of the San Francisco Bay Guardian Poetry Contest in 1991 and 1993. After a long career in theater, Sam retired in 2019 and is once again focusing his energies on poetry. Thank you for being here, Sam.
Oh, mute.
Thank you, Mike. Can you hear me now? I'm going to read 3 poems, and they will pretty much fill up my time, so I'm just going to read. Robert's Death. Sunday afternoon, and your room is filled with light, white light forged from all the rainbow. Your face is pain from a day and a night without one good breath. Your voice, a rasp rubbed between 2 pillows. There you are, crawling backstroke through the searing desert, parched for water. Water, like a last-ditch mantra, before your vision of afterlight breaks through the dam of sunlight, flooding daylight with nightlight. Present in the moment of passage, you are more real than the portent dream of yourself, more light than 40 years should bring, more ready to travel than the Bactrian camel, more a home for who I am than ever I have known. It is your last hour. The sound of your breath is like air filtering through water, bubbling to the surface, bursting into light like flashbulbs in my ear. Your last hour, longer than life, slowing time, slowing down between each breath, slowing. I can feel Alan's presence with us in the light, beckoning, opening his arms. You turn and look up into Victor's eyes. What do you tell Victor in your eyes? I can see such light glinting, reverberating, looking for the light's way out, looking on past Victor, up into Alan's ghost-lit eyes, breath slowing. Will there be another? No. And then a breath. Your face eases, slowing. Will there be another? Slower. No. And then a breath. Slow. No. And then no. The old eyes change color from green to gray-blue. Almost instantly, you are not here. You do not linger. I cannot taste any of you in the air, just light. You and Alan have linked arms, traveling out. I want to hold too, but I let go. You are so light.
Mm.
3 days after Alan died, before you sat on the edge of my bed, I could feel you in the air around me, like Ophelia's shawl floating downstream, more than a ghost haunting. It was truly you. Light concentrated like pin spots on 3 tracks, picking out your aura, water lily-like, peeking at your 7 chakras. The light opened and you stepped through. A tree squirrel clawed the shake roof over our heads. Your hand warmed as you curled the light into small orbs between your palm, brushed its heat against my cheek. In your eyes, words sparkled like shooting stars. Sounds pressed onto my lips, alternating crimson and turquoise. Visual sentences about the cosmic dust of your journey. From the tips of both hands, you threw the orbs off. I could hear your voice. Everything I had feared is not here. I don't know yet what is, but I know I do not fear. Long silence engulfed us as we sat, not touching, as if you were me. The floorboards hummed an ancient elegy. My eyes closed in harmony. In sleep, I could feel you still.
Mm.
Army of the horsemen. They have been with us from the very beginning, the dead who haunt us, the dead who hold our love, the dead who help us and trip us up. All the love I feel and have felt is rooted in the love I found in my heart for my dead Robert, who raised me up, threw me aside, and reached into that hole to pull me out. For Alan, who wanders still in unmapped alternate dimensions. For Chuck, who turned crimes against nature into art and poetry. For John Esther, who belly danced across Ishtar's altar into Astarte's hoary realm. For Drew, who led the chorus to Oedipal infamy. For Misha, who was the well one. For Rick, who married drag with life and lived. For Jimmy, whose shining white hair gave luster to his collection of antiques. For Leighton, who suffered so, but smiled and laughed until he closed his eyes at last, forever. For Sylvester, who rained love's confetti onto adoring, muscled, sweating crowds dancing at his feet. For Leonard, who stormed the ramparts of the armed services, who was given a medal for killing 2 men and a discharge for loving 1. Oh, Captain, my Captain, not much of a military man, nor much of a captain, but possessing such beauty, men follow. I follow where you lead, into the breach of the unknown, holding hands, into the ephemerality, not the finality of death. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sam. Thank you for the heart you put into your reading. All of you, really. I'm going to turn this over to Chris now for a few minutes. Just an opportunity again for people to respond to what they've heard or ask a question.
Please do either raise your virtual hand, or you can put a question in the chat, or you can wave your hand if you've got a question or comment for any of the readers. Please do. I want to say, Sam, I love the strength of your words, the power of them.
Thank you.
The way you put them together is, yeah.
Can I say?
Yes, John.
Hurrah for love's confetti.
Yeah, yeah.
Did I get that right? Is it?
Hey, Sam, are all of those poems in the book?
Yes, they are. All 3 of them are.
Oh, cool. Thank you so much. I love the cosmic dust of your journey.
Oh.
And Carlin, I love the, the experience, the watching your journey as you went back in time, as you actually traveled back with your own words and your own feelings. And that's what all of your words do for me, is, and I watch with my clients as the words and the gifts of other people take them on a journey that they can't touch on their own. And watch when that moment happens, when that there's that touchstone of being able to connect and feel something and not be afraid of the feeling. To have that power in that feeling, and also to feel the gentleness and the necessity of it at the same time, and the sweetness is so important, because that feeling of missing and loss, even after all these years, it never goes away. You can always go back there in a heartbeat. And we need to be able to feel that. Yeah.
I'm just aware that none of this is spoken about in a public space very often, if ever.
See that Paula Wagner has her hand up.
Yeah, Paula.
I mean, I think the variety of poems is just that in itself is so healing, and each one is as different as the proverbial snowflake, but yet each one melts into a drop of water that forms an ocean that comforts me greatly. And I wanted to, I mean, I could say something about all of them, but I wanted to mention to Ken, I loved your use of rhyme. It, you know, sometimes rhyme can get a little bit da 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 da, but yours heightened and made accessible all of the emotion that your poetry holds in a wonderful way. And I'm very sorry for your loss. I did lose someone very close to me to drugs, and almost lost another one. So I know that how fragile, that line is, and my heart is with you.
To add on to that too, Ken, one of the things I was struck with too about the rhyming was that it seemed so perfect as a way of commenting about the loss of a child. Even with a child who was 22, there was something so incredibly powerful in Dr. Susie about it, in terms of the way that it came across with the love, the sweetness, you know, children's poetry of the rhyming, that it sounded a little bit almost like a lullaby and a gift to a child for me. Yeah.
And one of the things that I love about the variety in this book is that, I mean, you know, the experience of, let's say, Ken and Nori, what they've written about at least are so raw. And there's the other, you know, the one of many other aspects of grief. I mean, the kind of transcendent beauty of some of what Carlin and Sam shared, and really Dorothy's poem too. I mean, you know, it's sort of more in the middle of the process, and yet it's so beautifully transcendent. And there's just so many different aspects and experiences of grief, and they're all real, and they can all happen at any time.
Yep.
It's really cool.
What I love about the poem is even our most raw voice, like nothing needs to be accounted for or explained or apologized for, certainly. And I when poetry becomes a healing act.
Michelle's poem was written so soon after her father died, and yet there's a a beauty to that too. I mean, you know, a kind of looking from a higher place in the midst of talking about the details, you know. And really, Sam, I mean, Sam's poem about Robert's death is the same. I mean, so much beauty, and he's talking about something that had just happened.
Mhm. Well, I think the other thing is that you get a sense with so diverse ways of presenting grief. You get a sense that when we're talking about grieving, or when counselors are working, or grief groups are working, when we say grief shows up in so many different ways, it's unique to each person. You see it through the work here. You see it through the tone, you see it through the words, you see it through the impact, you see it through the years that it continues to show up, and how it lingers and we move with it. And it's like water, it just keeps flowing through and over and around. And putting all of this together really demonstrates, when you're reading poetry from one poet, you read in their style, right? But when you see poetry from all kinds of different individuals who have different ways of viewing the world and speaking what their views are and relating their heart, it's just so powerful how unique it is, and yet there's something from everyone.
Can I say something? Like I felt like in the last poem, I think the last poem Nori read, and the last poem that Paco Michel read, that there was a resonance there. And so there's, in addition to things being very unique, there's also threads that, you know, I think connect, not I think, they do connect people. And sort of, and there we find sort of perhaps unexpected common ground that we wouldn't know if we didn't share, if we didn't write those down and share them.
Yeah. Which is what happens when people like Ken find heroes or go to a grief group, you know, and start to be able to have conversations with other people about grieving, or read someone's poetry about grieving and go, yes, you know, that's it.
And I see like a comment from Ruth. Ruth Lefave, is that how you say your name, Ruth? Can I ask? She commented on The Light's Way Out. She commented on a home for who I am. Whose line was that? A home for who I am. Was that Sam?
That was mine, Sam.
So Ruth, thank you for, you know, mirroring back those lines. Sometimes in my practice of poetry therapy or poetry as healer, just mirroring back a line is way enough to let someone know that you've been listening and have heard them. And I just want to just appreciate Ruth for mirroring back those lines to those two lines. Mike, this will be recorded. This is recorded. So if people would like to receive a recording, we'll, Erin, my administrative assistant for the Institute for Poetic Medicine, will, I think, make that available.
So I think in the interest of people wanting to move on with their evening, we should wrap this up.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, Fareshta, that we won't have time, but we're already 15 minutes over. So
Fareshta, I'm going to stay, Fareshta, to hear you. So
yes, and I'll stay too, because I would love to have you read your work, but I don't want people to feel like they have to. Fareshta is another contributor to the book.
Oh,
and yeah, so she's got a beautiful poem to her mother in it. So what I'll just wrap up with is thank you all so much for coming. This is always such a wonderful experience to me to hear people read their poems. And those of you who are contributors here, I've asked in emails, and I'll just ask right here, if you would like to record yourself separately from this, reading any of your poems. I have a number of them on my website, and I would love to add yours to it, to the collection there. So I think it's just so great to hear people read rather than one can get so much from the words, but so much more when you're hearing it the way the poet intended. So my website is mikebernhardt.net. People there's an order page there that just links to Amazon and all the other places where people can buy the book. I'm not selling it directly. And have people buy lots of books. The proceeds are going to John's Institute for Poetic Medicine. So I want to give him as much money as possible.
I mean, Mike, I feel a responsibility to say the Institute serves people. We bring poetry to immigrant and refugee youth, to people overcoming addiction, to women who have lost a child, to people who have lost a child. I mean, there's just, people who are unhoused. And so we have a lot of projects like that we fund. So I'm so grateful to Mike Bernhardt and his partner Yvonne Lafort for their, for this.
Yeah, I mean, John is just, he has committed his life to supporting people through poetry, and it's just, he's done so much beautiful work. So thank you for supporting this.
Ken Slezeric, did I get that right? Write me, and I'd like to hear about what you're up to. John at poeticmedicine.org.
Will.
Sorry, Mike.
That's all right. So I think we will call this done at this moment. Anyone who's wants to stay is welcome to stay. But we are officially